It's pretty incredible, isn't it? The things that some people are willing to say out loud. In those moments where you're taken aback and caught off guard, do you say something? Do you not say something? What do you do? In today's episode, it's all about how to handle inappropriate questions and comments. The next time that someone asks you an inappropriate question or makes an inappropriate comment, here's what I want you to do. Number one, say nothing. Just add 5 seconds of silence. This is a tip that I use all the time and recommend because it truly does work. About 5 seconds of silence, and you have to pair it with your face. All right, you don't have to say anything, but the look. And you know what kind of look I'm talking about. That look that says, I know you didn't just ask me what I think you asked me. Most of the time, that's all you have to do. Number two, if you need to be a little bit more direct, I'm going to encourage you to use phrases that aren't going to get the other person defensive. Phrases like, what's your intent? As in, what's your intent on asking? Or what makes you want to know? These are questions that, though direct, aren't going to make the situation worse. And number three, if you can, depending on the person, just kind of play it off. These are friendly ways to say things lighthearted, such as, I like to keep a little mystery, or that's between me and myself. Something that keeps the mood lighthearted, a little bit friendly, and lets them know you're not going to give that kind of information. Now listen, everybody is guilty of asking or making an inappropriate comment or question. Everybody. It's just called putting your foot in your mouth, where you didn't really mean to say that out loud and you can't believe you said that. You just go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just said that. And you wish you could put it back in, but you can't unring that bell. So I want to clarify that those who make inappropriate comments and questions, it doesn't make them a bad person. Now, there are some that they are bad, of course, but it doesn't mean that if you make the inappropriate question, that's exactly who that person is. Sometimes it's just an off day. Sometimes they can't believe that they just asked that, and they need you in many ways to show them that what they just did is not acceptable. Some people don't mean it to be inappropriate, right? You've asked that question or said something that it just came off the wrong way. What makes it inappropriate? A lot of different things, a lot of different contexts, but often some people just might ask a question and realize, oh, wait, I shouldn't have asked that. Well, I shouldn't have, I totally made a mistake there. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily inappropriate. It just means they asked the wrong question at the wrong time and said it the wrong way. So it might not be inappropriate to ask, but it might be inappropriate in terms of the overall context. So anytime you feel that, I want to make sure that I emphasize it's a case-by-case basis, and you're going to have to base it on who you're talking to, what you know about that person, what the context is, what the circumstances are. So don't assume that just because they asked it, it makes them a good or bad person. If there's one thing that I pray that you've learned from me, if you've listened to any of my podcasts or watched any of my content, it's that silence is truly powerful tool that you can use to apply with just about anything. When somebody's making a comment that is inappropriate or asking that question, using silence as your answer is a way to set your feet in the conversation and saying no. Okay? It's a way of almost putting up the hand. And you're not having to do anything. Understand that just because they asked that question, it is solely within your power to decide if you say anything at all. Hear me again. It is solely within your power when somebody asks that inappropriate question for you to have any response whatsoever. Understand, you can have nothing. You can say nothing. You can walk away. You could just ignore it. And that is solely within your power. And there's nothing wrong with that, depending on what they ask. Silence is a way to allow them to hear what they said back. For them to go, oh, that didn't sound good at all. What I like to do and encourage when somebody's making an inappropriate question or comment is to give them a face. Not like a stank face, not like an angry face. I'm just saying, look. I look like, God, did you really just ask me that? Did you really just say that? This face that says, do I really have to comment on that? Or maybe even stronger, this is not something I'm going to comment on. When you pair with that nonverbal communication, you say all that you need to say without saying a single word. All right. So anytime that you feel that tension, the biggest takeaway that I want you to have is you're under no obligation to say a thing. So often we feel like just because somebody asks us something, we have to have an answer. We have to have a response. Typically when somebody says something inappropriate, we kind of, in the South we say hem and haw, you kind of just go, I mean, and you feel like you have to have some kind of answer because they asked. When it's inappropriate, there's no obligation. There's nothing polite, a rule that you need to follow. It's just simply staying within your own power and your needs and your own mental health of saying, you know what? No, that's not something I'm going to respond to. Now, if you need to be a little bit more direct, then I'm going to encourage you to ask a question back to them. So often you're not giving them the answer that they want. You're asking a question that serves as a second mirror in a way to see what are they getting at here? What's the point? So you ask the question, what's your intent? Meaning, what's your intent on asking that? Usually if I ask that question, somebody says something, an inappropriate question, I might ask, what was your intent? What's your intent with that? They often will say, oh, well, I mean, and they'll try and find an intent if they have one, or what makes you want to know? What makes you want to know? Often when you ask those kind of questions, being very direct about it, you're going to find they don't really have a reason. They don't have a true reason in wanting to know that information. They just want to know. Or they felt like they ought to have it and ask something, and so they feel like just because they asked, they're going to get it. And they're going to realize that's just not the case. Or what also happens is, because I make mistakes, you make mistakes, we all make mistakes, is that when you ask that question, what makes you want to know? What makes you ask? It's not why. Right? I'm not saying the word why, which makes it offensive. Like, why do you want to know? Instead of it's what? What makes you ask? Using what doesn't get people nearly as offensive. So if I say, what makes you ask? They might have a reason that I go, oh, it wasn't inappropriate at all. I just heard it wrong. I misinterpreted what they were wanting. Often that happens to everybody, where you assume one thing because we like to assume the worst. We're humans. And what they meant to ask was something completely innocent. We just heard it wrong. So when you serve a question that is a mirror, like what's your intent in asking, or what makes you ask, and you find out, oh, they actually have a good reason. Oh, they actually have a good intent in asking. It's not inappropriate at all. Then it's a way of not taking it personally, right? You're giving them grace in that moment. And you're also giving grace to yourself of saying, oh man, I got this all wrong. Yeah, of course I'll answer that question. So glad that you asked. So often it works both ways, where you're not just assuming the worst out of everybody. Instead, you're asking this question that is going to be both a buffer for the other person as well as yourself. And so let's say that you gave that 5 seconds of silence, and then you followed up with a question of what makes you ask? And they have an okay answer, but not something that you still really want to share. What I like to recommend is give a little bit of lightheartedness into your response. Reason being, at that point, I don't feel like they've done enough, depending on what they've said, for me to use my words to shut the door in their face, which we will talk about should you need that. But lighthearted in terms of, well, I like to keep a little mystery, or that's between me and myself, or the one I like to use is, that one's for me. That one's for me. In other words, I'm saying, hey, you know a lot about me, most likely. The fact that we're talking together, you might know some things about me, or you think you know, but that particular element that you're asking, that one's for me. I'm keeping that one to myself. You don't get that one. That's what I'm sending with that message. So understand, if you need to, just go back and say, wow, that one's for me. That one's for me. You're not going to share it. You don't need to share it. And you're letting them know that what they asked is not something that is for them to find out. Now, at my favorite part of the podcast, and this is where I get to answer a question from a follower. If you're part of my newsletter, where I send out one communication tip once a week right to your inbox, I'm able to respond to people, and they're able to ask me questions. And here on the podcast, I have been doing this since I started, and I pull a question from someone, given the topic that I'm going to be talking about that given week. This one is from Rachel. Rachel is in Brazil. Rachel says, Jefferson, love your information. Thank you so much. I find it so useful. Thanks, Rachel. I have a problem. There is somebody that I work with who likes to ask me inappropriate questions. This is a supervisor. I never know really what to do. I typically try to just laugh it off, but I'd like to have an actual response. Any help would be appreciated. Rachel, I totally understand what you're going through. Most of the time, these kind of situations come up at work, right? Where you're not really family, but yet you're together all the time, so people feel like they can ask certain things or say certain things that they otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable about should y'all just be regular strangers on the street. So in that kind of situation, this is what I'd recommend to you, Rachel. Try a little bit of silence, and instead of this laughing nervousness, channel that into a response. If silence feels uncomfortable to you, or you feel like that's going to put you in a position that makes it feel more awkward, which is not a bad thing, by the way, channel that into a response of what makes you ask. All right? And don't take away that nervous energy and channel that into a response. When you start speaking, a lot of that nervous energy tends to flow out because you're breathing it out. All right? So when that happens, just what makes you ask? What makes you ask? And if this person, let's say the supervisor, is just tending to press a little bit more, make you feel uncomfortable in that way, then use words of preference and past. This is what I mean by that. When you say words that show that you have a history of doing things, it doesn't make it nearly as awkward because it's not as brunt with somebody for them to be, is brunt even a word? I feel like it should be. Maybe blunt. Maybe brash. I mean, in that work environment, you don't want to sound like you're going to turn them off. I mean, you're probably good friends with this person, or you work with this person. You want to have a good relationship, so you don't want to just, kick them in the teeth with your words. But when you use phrases like, well, I prefer to, or I typically, or most of the time, or in the past, anytime you can indicate that you have a history of doing certain things a certain way, then that other person feels like this is just part of your manual. This is how you operate. I'm not singled out. So if that asks you an inappropriate question, let's say a guy asks, just for some dumb reason, asks what your pant size is, okay, or what shoe size, or whatever it is, or your weight, or anything. Often you can say, I prefer not to share that. Instead of, that's private. Right? And instead of having this snappy response where somebody goes, oh, excuse me, sorry. When you can use phrases that say, I prefer not to share that, or I typically don't talk about my appearance. Any way to show that you have a history of doing things, whether it's typically in the past, the way I prefer to do something, the way I typically do something, it allows you and the other person to have a much more smoother interaction because they don't feel like they're singled out. It makes them feel like, oh, this is just how you respond. This is part of your manual. This is part of the instructions that if I want to talk to you, this is not something that you share. So it's not that I'm the big bad person who asked this bad question. It is that this is information that you just categorically don't share. And often that's going to go a whole lot better in that kind of situation. Now, Rachel, if they ask you a question that is just totally below the belt, it is not something that they should ever come out of their mouth, and you need to be a lot more strong with it, then channel that nervous energy into absolute seriousness. This says, that is not an appropriate question. That is not an appropriate question. Here you are labeling what they just asked. Simple as that. That is not an appropriate question. Cool? So when you hear that, most likely they're going to hear that, and it's going to channel to them, oh, I'm so sorry. They ought to be apologizing. If they're not, well, then I encourage you to find some other ways to report that kind of behavior because that's unacceptable. All right, Rachel, wish you the best. Today we're talking about how to sound more assertive, that feeling of being honest and direct, but at the same time, respecting the other person. What does it sound like, and how can you do it right away? When you need to sound more assertive, here's what I want you to do. Number one, stop over apologizing. This is where you say, I'm sorry, so sorry, in every single sentence. I know it's a tick. I know it's a habit, but you got to stop, and I'm going to explain why. Number 2, stop undervaluing what you have to say. That's when you downgrade your comment before you even get it out. Again, this is hurting your confidence, and we're going to dive into it. And number 3, get comfortable with the word no. Get comfortable disappointing people. No is a complete sentence. I want you to think back to a conversation where you wish you would have sounded a little bit more assertive. Maybe it was at home with a partner or a spouse. Maybe it was at work with a coworker or a boss. A time where you wanted to be honest, you wanted to be direct, but you just couldn't find the words. Think back to that conversation in your mind and wonder, what could I have said differently? And here's what I need to tell you right out of the gate. If you don't find your assertive voice, you will be walked over. It will affect your confidence, and it will affect the trajectory of your life. It sounds harsh, but it's very true. Now, in my life, where I found that I struggled with assertiveness the most was anytime I was new somewhere. Maybe it was a new school or a new law firm, and I felt like I was crawling into it. I found myself being deferential to anybody and everything, even at the sake of my own well-being and my own boundaries. But what do? You're new. You feel like you have to do it. Well, that's not exactly true. When you find that assertive voice and you're able to say what you want to say and do it respectfully, it will change your life, and I mean for the better, because people will take notice. Your reputation will change, your credibility will change, and man, that's the good stuff. So I'm going to throw out some scenarios to you, and you let me know if any of them ring a bell. You walk in 1 minute late to a meeting, and the first thing out of your mouth is, "Hey, so sorry I'm late," when you throw all of your stuff down. Or it took you 2 days to respond to somebody's email, and the first word in your response back is, "So sorry. So sorry, I just saw this. Sorry, I am just now getting back to you." Or you're trying to get somebody's attention, and the first thing out of your mouth is, "So sorry. Hey, so sorry, 2 seconds. Hey, so sorry, I just need to talk to you for a second." You got to stop. Listen to me. You have to stop. Those aren't apologies. And if they are, well, then you're just apologizing for all the wrong things. You're apologizing for your existence. You're apologizing for your time. And you're apologizing for your priorities. These aren't real apologies. All right? You're finding ways to feel like you're an inconvenience to someone. But let me tell you, your worth is far more than just trying to feel that you're not an inconvenience to someone, that you always have to prove that you're not an inconvenience. So we're going to fix that. And the way to do it is instead of saying, "I'm sorry," you're going to say, "Thank you." All right? It's as simple as that. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry," we're going to use words of gratitude, like "I appreciate" or "thank you." So if you come in walking into that meeting and you're 30 seconds late, you're 1 minute late, nobody's expecting an apology for that. Now, if you're 5 minutes late, I think it's absolutely the right thing to apologize, because at that point you're wasting their time. But if you're just a few minutes late, if you're barely over the line, it's okay to say, "Thank you for your patience. Thanks for waiting on me. I appreciate your time." That is assertive. Or if it's in the context of you sending an email to somebody, instead of feeling like you need to say, "Hey, so sorry, I'm just getting back to this," just respond, "I appreciate your time. Thanks for your understanding. Thank you for your patience." These are all things that they're going to say, "Oh yeah, well, you're welcome. I do have patience. I do have understanding." Instead of you going, "Hey, so sorry," this less, making you feel less in that way. Instead you're being assertive with it. You're standing in your presence and saying, "Yeah, I had other things to do,